Rooted in faith, rooted in family, rooted in values, rooted in traditions. Welcome to the Rooted Outdoors podcast. Welcome to the Rooted Outdoors podcast. I'm your co-host, Corey Bauman. I'm with Dave Ashworth and our special guest tonight. We're not going to spend that much time doing updates, and I'll introduce him in a second. But Dave, how you doing, man?
I'm good. It's getting hot in Pennsylvania. I can't imagine what it's like in Texas for you, but Pennsylvania is hot.
So it hasn't hit 100 yet, which to be middle of July and have not hit 100 is actually pretty good. So
nice.
Needless to say, it's hot, but it's not humid like it is.
Yeah, we have both. We have 95 and humid, and that's not fun.
Man, I don't have too many updates. It is in Texas. It's draw season, so it's our time to apply for our draws. They have to be in by August, and so I'm looking at a bunch of different hunts this year. One cool one is we're looking at doing an aoudad hunt. And it's a really tough draw, but if you get drawn, you basically go to this canyon in Texas and you hunt aoudad, which is basically a sheep. So a
awesome.
ram. So it'd be pretty cool to get that. But
that would be
different things, and obviously being out in Texas, there's all these different game to hunt. You know, growing up hunting just turkey and deer. So it's just a whole new world. But just kind of working on some of that stuff. How about you? Anything?
Nice.
You're getting a bow.
I am. I'm getting a new bow this week. I'm pumped about. I haven't got a new bow in a long time, so I'm really excited to get a new bow, get shooting with that. Also, we invested in some sail cams this year. I've never done that in the past, so we'll be putting those out soon, and I feel like that's gonna really hurt my work production in the fall.
Dude.
So I'm gonna try my best to get work done. I'm gonna get pictures every day and not just want to run to the stand, but.
Yeah, I want to be on those notifications, of course, but I thought that too. I'm like, man.
I know it could be bad, but yeah, that's it. So just, lazy summer right now, but before we know it, it'll be September. We'll be planning some hunts, which will be good. For
sure. Dude, let's just jump right into the podcast. Excited. We've been talking about having this guy on the podcast for like a year now, ever since he made us our map of the farm. So I'm excited. So tonight with us, we've got Ben Harshyne on the podcast, and just a little bit about Ben. So Ben's got a huge love, of course, of the outdoors, and his hard work has ignited at a young age throughout the hardwood ridges of Pennsylvania. So he's born and raised in Pennsylvania, and in 2010, he fused the love of whitetails with his technical skills to build America's leading land mapping company called HUNTERRA, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Already, we're going to talk a lot about HUNTERRA Maps, where that was fostered from. So thousands of relationships with landowners by mapping their own slice of heaven. And Dave and I have our own slice of heaven that we've had for the last 3 years. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about that with Ben. HUNTERRA's first partnership started in 2011 with Whitetail Properties Real Estate. And in 2016, he was offered one of their coveted territories. Now he calls Iowa home. So big change from Pennsylvania to Iowa. And that's where the hallowed ground provides endless opportunities for solid investing and world-class hunting. His strongest dedication lies, though, in delivering renowned client services, his bow hunting, studying land, and of course his family. So Ben, welcome to the podcast, man.
Fellas, thanks for having me. That was quite a mouthful. You did a really good job navigating that. That was that's my bio. That is my bio on Whitetail Properties Real Estate. So it definitely that was over the top. Great introduction. But anyways, I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man, we're happy to have you, and we're excited to jump right into your story. I know you have a good story. I've heard it before on other podcasts, and excited for you to share it with our folks and our listeners. So tell us a little bit about how'd you get, obviously did a little bit of the bio, but tell us your deep story, man. Tell us everything about how you got to become a map maker. How does that even happen?
Yeah, that is kind of wild. There's not a ton of us around. So I you know, like I said, I grew up Western Pennsylvania, the little town of Shalakta. If anybody knows Western PA, town of Shalakta, and the larger town that most people probably know is Indiana. The college there is IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So that's my hometown. And then when I was, graduated high school, I went to school at Penn State, and I was trying to get an engineering degree, but man, I just could not pass those very important courses like calculus and physics. My brain just does not work that way. And my advisor said, you're going to need to take some credits here and figure out a plan B, or you're going to not be able to pass college. And I just started taking gen ed courses, and this one came up that was map making, and it was cartography and intro to GIS. GIS, most people are familiar with now if you go on your county assessor site or whatnot, but it is the field of maps, whether it's digital or you design maps or you do analysis or imagery. Any way you touch maps is really that field, GIS. And I gravitated towards the design of it. I've always been, I don't want to say artistic, but I've always had an eye for good. I guess I know what I like from a visual standpoint, and I like design, whether you're designing a map or the design of a piece of furniture or the design of a farm or the design of a brand, a new brand that's coming out. I'm intrigued by design, and this mapping course kind of aligned with that. And I've always just kind of gravitated and enjoyed looking at maps. A lot of people do. And I got a degree in that. I really enjoyed it. And then for 7 years, basically right out of school, I moved to Northern Virginia, and I worked for 7 years at the National Counterterrorism Center, right outside of Washington, D.C. And what I did was I made finished intelligence products. Mainly, I was the map guy there initially, and an analyst would come to the shop I worked at, and maybe they were an expert on Africa or Al Qaeda, or name whatever they were focused on, and I would help visualize their story if they were creating a briefing. And so just constantly making maps, from that career, and that kind of translated into some design work in that role as well. And really where HUNTERRA started would have been in 2009. I made a map for my dad for Father's Day of the ground that he raised me on. And basically, the round top that I lived on, it's just timber for miles and miles in each direction. And so whenever we would look at maps, it was just always be this just big flat green blob, and you really couldn't quite tell, especially the topography, which is those were the features that my dad and I really looked for when we're trying to bow hunt. So right around that time, I had a little bit of bow hunting experience, and I was getting deeper into hunting, and I made this map for him where I figured out a way to visualize the terrain, basically in a 3D way, and then blend that with an aerial photo. And it was a really cool product gift at the time, and he showed his buddies, and they bought maps from me, and then their buddies bought maps from me. And so I started this little hobby kind of accidentally. And then we came out to Illinois one year for it would have been that fall, 2009. 2009, I came out on a bow hunt with a guy named Aaron Milliken, and at the time he had an outfitting business in Western Illinois. And I showed him some of these maps, and he said, I want one of those for every one of my farms. I want a nice big one to put in the lodge to show the guys that are coming in where the different farms are and how to get there, and the stand sites and everything. And he said, you better take this a little more seriously, because there's nothing around like these maps that you're making. It's they look 3D, even though they're just printed on a piece of paper. And so he really pushed me to take it a little bit more seriously and said, listen, you've got a really good opportunity here. And so I just started to chip away at the branding of HUNTERRA and my process. And of course I had my full-time job still. So it was in the beginning just trying to make a little bit of pocket change for hunting season. And then I got a phone call one day from Paul Sawyer, and Paul Sawyer is one of the founding partners of Whitetail Properties Real Estate. He said, "Hey, we're this up and coming brokerage, and we want to use your maps for closing gifts for our clients. Whenever we sell them a farm, we want to give them a really nice map as a thank you for doing business with us." And that that fall, I went out there on another hunt and met with them, and basically forged HUNTERRA's first corporate account, sponsorship, partnership. Started making maps for their television show, Whitetail Properties Real Estate, and they got away from Google Earth, and we were able to make some really good custom maps to visualize those guys' hunts on television. And it just worked out really well. You know, they had different maps than any other hunting show. They were very, quickly, exponentially growing real estate company, and that really blew up HUNTERRA quickly. So, that was around 2011 where we really started to get busy, and my wife ended up coming on board full time before I did. But we held on until 2014, and that's when we said, "Listen, we're just gonna trust our faith here. We're gonna try to grow HUNTERRA as big as we can." And to do that is not around Washington, D.C. We're not really that happy here per se, and we're going to take a leap of faith. And we ended up going out to the Midwest mainly because of, we do a lot of business out here, and it's really kind of the epicenter for whitetail hunting, good high quality whitetail hunting. And I had some really good contacts in Whitetail Properties and some other friends that I met out here. So it just made sense to come out to the Midwest. And selfishly, I picked Iowa, really because of the whitetails, so that's my story, leading up to what would have been 2 years ago. They called me up and said, "Listen, we would like you to represent us in Eastern Iowa." We moved to Iowa City. That's where we live today. And they said, "We've got these counties that are right outside of Iowa City that we want you to do business in and represent us and sell ground, if you're interested in that." And so, HUNTERRA was right at the point where I could dedicate some time to the land business, but at the same time, I was going to try to push and grow HUNTERRA more and more to the point where it could just be rolling and I could step away. And that's where I'm at now, is really diving into my real estate career. So, I've got my hands in a couple different things, but yeah, that's what leads me to be talking to you fellas today.
Nice.
That's great, man. I was going to literally ask you that question. Have you leveraged yourself enough to step away from HUNTERRA and make your real estate full time? And you answered that question. That's interesting. I was in real estate for residential, not selling land, but residential real estate for like 9 years. And I always said if I ever got back into real estate, I'd want to sell ranches or land, probably because I'm in Texas now. But that's cool, man. That's really, really great opportunity and awesome story. I appreciate you sharing.
So let's, I want to talk about the HUNTERRA maps a little bit. I'm sure a lot of people know what they are and what makes them unique. And it's, a combination of a couple of things, but can you, kind of touch on, you're the best person to talk about it. Obviously I can talk about it, but you're going to be the best person to talk about what really makes your maps unique, and what is, kind of the components of your maps that do that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So there's a couple different layers of our business that are really valuable. And the foundation really is the Terra image. We trademarked the Terra image, which is essentially a blend of a 3D terrain model with your aerial photos, so that you can have just a regular printed map and you can understand where all of your valleys, your ditches, your ridge lines, all of the subtle or drastic topography changes are on the ground that you hunt, whether you're in Maine or New Mexico or Nebraska or wherever. We're looking for those fine details and terrain features that whatever we're chasing is going to use to their advantage for survival. And so being able to visualize that with our technology, coupled with our, we really focus on high quality American made products that we print with, whether it's a waterproof field map or our light adhesive poster maps that you can frame, or our Magna maps, which are our magnetic. We're focused on a high quality print. And really lastly is the one-on-one service that we offer, regardless of how big we get as a company, when you call Hunterra, we're going to be able to, one individual is going to work with you to be able to make exactly the map you're looking for. And just to give you an example, like, yeah, you can just zoom in and we can, you can trace out your 120 acres that your grandpap's 120 acres that you hunt, and we can make a nice map of that. Or maybe you have 3 or 4 farms in a general area and you want a nice big map to display all of those, or you own a piece of ground and you're thinking, man, I really want to be able to see further off to my neighbors here so I can understand the travel more, or maybe you're eyeing being able to buy that someday. And so that customization of the client's area of interest is really where we shine as well, and being able to see that job the whole way through, set your expectations with a draft before it's printed, and really provide a boutique one-on-one experience. That's the foundation of our company. We don't have these massive marketing budgets or anything. We've slugged away with good word of mouth advertising. People were happy with how they were treated. They're happy with the product, and they tell their buddies, tell their family, and that's been valuable for us, So, yeah. Yeah, that should probably touch on what
you guys. So if somebody gets a map for you, we went through the process with you. We didn't ask this question, but like, if somebody gets a map made with you guys, do you ever do like a consult with them? So like, you make the map of the property. Do you ever go through a map with somebody and give them maybe some tips and tricks on, different terrain, maybe where to look for deer bedding and stuff like that? Maybe they don't really know. Maybe they just get into hunting and they print this map of their property they just got. Do you ever do anything like that with anybody?
I've done it accidentally a number of times, just kind of in conversation. Man, this place looks killer, and next thing you know, I'll be picking out some of their favorite stand sites. I've looked at so many of these farms over the years, and and my eye gravitates towards certain features. That being said, I don't offer it as a service right now. I think it'd be cool to be able to do it every once in a while, but not every property, every property is different, but it's to be able to be on the ground while you're looking at the map and really start to put the pieces of the puzzle together is ultimately where you're gonna learn the most and get the most out of your map. But just beforehand, before even stepping on, we can hone in pretty quickly on some of the more interesting parts of a farm. I feel confident in, and my challenge is to be able to, my goal, we will be creating more content that's going to help people get there, whether it's me on the phone or somebody else that's helping them through. It's okay. Let's look for some of these features, and we should be able to provide that content here pretty soon. So
yeah, I was just curious. That would definitely be another layer, another layer up of your business, like another layer up. And it would be, like you said, like, unless you're there, and I know there is companies that will go out and consult on, consult land and things like that. But like, even just looking at the map, giving them a place to start, somewhere to look. Of course, then I'm sure you have guys that you'll give them tips and they'll come back and go, well, the deer weren't there.
Yeah, exactly.
I also
right.
Like, I also stank when I went in, but like
we do have a nice map, and you were actually, you probably don't remember, you were the one who actually helped me kind of walk through the process. And your guys' maps are awesome, but what kind of like what you just said, and I can attest to this, is what really separated my experience was just the service that you provided. I sent you a ton of questions, you would respond to all of them right away, and just really helpful, making sure that I got exactly what I was looking for. So I think that what you're saying is not just you saying it, a customer that went through the process can attest to that. Job well done on that. At least in my experience, I have nothing but good things to say.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dave. That means a lot, and that's where the rubber meets the road. We've had Hunterra now for next year will be our 10-year anniversary, and it's what does that statistic look like? Like X amount of businesses don't make it to year 2, let alone year 5, and it's like, okay, we must be doing something right. But it's great to hear that you had a good experience with us.
Yeah, it was great. It's great. I think to kind of maybe shift gears a little bit and start talking about some more hunting stuff. You know, one thing that you mentioned, I think is a great point, and I'm sure you can touch on this, is a lot of people get, you know, whether they're buying a map or looking at a map, they get really focused on just their property. And I think it's really important to look at the big picture. You know, how are the surrounding properties playing into what your property is doing? Maybe your property is the prime bedding area, or maybe it's the prime feeding area. And then how you hunt the property, you know, is going to completely change, and not just say, okay, I have this property, I'm looking at it in a bubble. Where's the bedding? Where's the food? Where's this? And that's fine. That's important to do. But looking at it in the big picture is really important. And I'm sure you kind of already mentioned it, but I'm sure you can touch on that some more, especially as you're seeing people buy maps. Maybe encourage them to spread out just a little bit to see what else is going on around.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the balance. I mean, from a hunting perspective, you've got to be able to really look at kind of that larger view and just erase those property lines that, you know, if you're looking at Google Earth, just toggle that property line off and back up a little bit, and think that a whitetail is most likely, unless you got, you know, a very rare farm, whitetail is going to be spending time on your place, but he's going to be spending time on another place next door or 2 doors down, you know, and you, whether you're the fringe or his main core area, and then he ventures off elsewhere, it's really good to not just get tunnel vision. That being said, I feel like when you can get on a deer and your gut tells you that, man, he is around often a lot, and that's when you really do need to get tunnel vision and get the detail out of that map to be able to really fine tune your strategy from a number of yards standpoint sometimes. So, yeah. But you're right on that.
For sure. That makes sense.
I got a question.
So yeah, go ahead.
Some of the, like, you know, when you're looking at a map, like, there's obviously different terms, and I think we're still kind of learning some of that too, but like, what would be some of the key terms when you're looking at not just any map, but especially like one of your maps? What would be the key terms you would use to like identify certain terrain, just things on the map that people might want to be aware of when they're looking at a map?
Yep. The number one word that everybody says is edge. And I like to think of it as change. I want to find where things change. And that can be from a vegetation standpoint. That can be from a food source standpoint. That can be from a topography standpoint and the actual rises and falls of a piece of ground. Where change happens is where wildlife is right. How many times have you seen a deer skirt a field, you know, kind of pop out and then skirt a field edge before they really commit into? They don't just come right perpendicular right out into it all the time. I mean, I guess if they are, you know, certain circumstances, but when you find change an edge, whether that's where timber meets a field edge, maybe that's where mature timber meets stuff that's been logged. And sometimes you can't see that on a map, but you know, whenever it comes down to hunting, I mean, when you can identify those subtle changes and those hard changes in vegetation and terrain, that's where you're going to find movement the most. And so that's really what I'm looking for, especially from a map standpoint. And then whenever I, you know, pick different parts of that farm out on the map, then I can, you know, really put boots on the ground to hone in on you know, what my thoughts are and what my observations were with the map, and then get on the ground and do that. But that's definitely what I'm looking for is change.
Mm-hmm.
Put that whenever you're sitting there in a tree stand or you're scouting and you're finding sign, you gotta look for where the changes happen. And I'll give you guys a really good example. Mm-hmm. Occasionally we'll get imagery. We use imagery that is from the wintertime. Okay. And we don't have imagery, you know, leaf off or wintertime imagery for the whole country, but certain states will acquire it. Luckily in Iowa, we've got a really good data set of leaf off imagery. And so sometimes you'll see where a farmer or a landowner will burn CRP grass. So prescribed burning is a really good way to manage grass, manage vegetation and whatnot. So it's used a lot here. And it's amazing. You can see the deer trail so good in burnt fields or in CRP grass. And I mean, I could just show you example after example after example of just these trails all migrating to very specific types of change. And probably one of the most hot features I look for, at least in the Midwest, are corners. Whether it's a fence corner, just the corner of where timber meets a field, whether it's an outside corner or an inside corner, especially an outside corner where they have to go around the cover.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a magnet for these things. Wildlife, it's in their DNA to be near edge. And I can show you, a million examples of that. And so that gets all of us, whenever we're getting savvy with our maps and we're looking, that gets us that much farther to filling that tag, that much closer to filling that tag. So that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The most. Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. So something that I would love to do is, there's all types of different types of terrain and words that people throw around. There's saddle and ridge, draw. There's tons of them.
Mm-hmm.
What I'd love to do is kind of just walk through each of them, and kind of have you explain what they are, and in general how deer will use this specific terrain, but then also how hunters can potentially use that specific terrain. Obviously access is huge. So maybe just walk through a bunch of those, and I can start with a list, or you can start, doesn't matter. But I think it'd be really helpful just to hear what these things are, because I think a lot of them too, there's terms that people use, and I think it's important that people are using the same terms so that they're understood. If I call it one thing and you call it something else, and they're really the same thing, that's going to cause issues and be confusing, because we're thinking in our head it's different. So just to kind of hone in on, okay, here's what it is, and here's what it should be called, and then maybe here's some things that other people call them, I think would be really helpful, to kind of go through that, kind of do that exercise, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're definitely right. I've heard different terminology for different things, and so the coolest example I've seen is with your hand. So when you make a fist, and this is like from the old Army, this is from the old like Army handbook, and so you make this fist, and like this is your ridge line, right?
Yep.
So your knuckles are your ridge line, and then in between you've got these little indentations in between your knuckles are your saddles. Okay, so envision when's the last time you were up on top of a ridge and then it dropped a little bit. You're high, and then it dropped, and then it came back down. There's probably a deer trail somewhere there, just because it's the lower spot and it's easier to travel through there. So I'm really looking for saddles. Saddles are a nice feature to look for, to be able to get deer movement back and forth. And what's nice is when you find that trail that usually is perpendicular or angled with the ridge, you can be able to hunt different sides of it. If you can access each side, that's even better. A lot of times you'll be coming up the face of a ridge, and I know that, like, if you try to hunt an afternoon and you're walking up the face of a ridge, you're probably bouncing deer off of it, because they're going to be bedded on. They're going to so if you got your wind coming this way, you think about, okay, how can a whitetail survive? Well, the whitetail is going to use not just his eyes, he's going to use his nose as well, and his ability to hear. He's going to use all of his senses to survive, he or she. A lot of times that mature buck, who's the smartest animal in the woods, he's going to be bedded on the opposite side. So if you got this ridge that's running this way and you have your wind coming across, why would he not spend time here so he could look down over the hill and he could smell whatever's coming over the backside that he can't see? And everybody's probably looking like, what the heck is on that guy? I got burned by some wild parsnip the other day. I was clearing a trail out for a stand I hung, so I don't want people to get too freaked out. I'll just cut to the chase. That's what that is wild.
Get that out of the way early here.
Yeah, get that out of the way. But anyway, so we've got our ridge line, we've got our saddles, and then in between those saddles, we've got where our fingers spread apart. That's a draw. So how many times have you been up on top of a field and you see where that water just starts to cut a little bit of a ditch, and then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper as it goes down the hill? And so that is what a draw looks like. So the draw is always going to be the draw is always going to be perpendicular to the ridge. Okay. So we've got our draws, and so draws are really interesting because you can find a lot of movement. You can find a lot of movement kind of back and forth at this higher point, but you also will find perpendicular, and you think, man, some of those things are so deep. Well, you might just find a place that's a little bit easier to cross. And so when you're winter scouting, you walk up those draws, start at the bottom, go to the top, start at the top, go to the bottom, try to find where they're going perpendicular as well.
Yeah.
One of the biggest deer I've ever chased, I grunted him over. He was 2 spurs away. And so what a spur is a secondary ridge, all of the fingers that come off of your main ridge line. Yep. So here's your main ridge line. These here are called spurs. And I'm not making these up. This is from Army school whenever they teach you about reading terrain. So the spurs are going to be your secondary ridges. That's what Bill Winke calls them, is secondary ridges. And each of those points can be really interesting. And, Bill's got a lot of info on how to hunt those types of things, but that's what's going to separate. Those little ravines are going to separate these individual spurs that come off of the main ridge. But anyways, one of the bigger deer I've ever chased, I grunted him off of the next spur to the east. And what he jumped over, or somehow he went down into like a 12-foot gully and came up the other side. So it's not always black and white where they're gonna go up and then around. I mean, they may just cut straight across. So you got to just find those certain places where they like to cross to, perpendicular to those. So
the term hollow, is that the same as a draw?
Yeah, I think so. Hollows though are more like, you go into Tennessee, you get into Kentucky, West Virginia, and you'll have these more like it's just a draw that's on another level. When you get in that big mountain country, Appalachian Mountains, the Smoky Mountains, the Ozarks, you get into those big mountain countries. So you might have a really deep cut that goes for a mile up there, and you can call it a draw, but I probably would call that more a hollow. Okay. And honestly, I mean, people that live there and call that every day, they probably could describe it better than me. But yeah, there's sometimes some different terminology. Some people call them guts. I've heard them called guts before. Yep. I've heard them called ditches. I'm more so look at a ditch is just a direct result from 2 fields kind of running together with each other, and whether that gets timber or brushy or whatever, that I would consider that more of a ditch. But these different features are all interesting things that we can pick out on a map, and we can surmise certain things of what we're going to see. And it goes back to bedding and what these deer are using whenever they're just chilling throughout the day. How are they using that terrain? And then that combined with their senses to be able to survive in bed and cover all their bases, especially a mature whitetail. A lot of times that wind's going to be coming from an area where they can't see, whether that's directly behind them or quartering, or they're catching some sort of weird thermal that's coming up from the bottom in the morning. They can smell everything that's on the bottom, and those thermals are rising up, so. Yep. That's a lot of stuff we're covering.
No, that's okay.
Look for change. So
yeah. So you talked about pretty basic, ridge, saddle, and then kind of into a draw. In general, if you were looking to hunt something like that, as the deer are traveling kind of in the saddle to get from one side to the other, is it just a matter of kind of hunting on the top of the ridge on each side, depending on the wind? Do you kind of get down in a little bit, or typically what would you look to do?
I would really try to look for where, I mean, with the saddle, I think it just depends on how wide that ridge is. I mean, I've been on ridges that are 60, 70 yards wide, and it is draft of a you can't identify as easily where they're going to move as opposed to picking kind of a skinnier ridge, or if that saddle is up against some tighter cover that maybe just down over the hill. That's what I'm trying to focus in on. And I want to get in the game. I want to be within 30 yards of that trail or closer if I can get a good tree, or if I know that I can get good access without bumping something, then maybe right on the other side.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's more identify a saddle, identify where you have an idea deer might be moving, and then, to figure out like, and kind of tune in on where you kind of have to get on the ground and look a little bit deeper at what is actually going on. How thick is it? How big is actually this ridge? Where's the trail going? And then you can kind of determine, where you're going to hunt, and also how you're going to access it based on certain wind. That's kind of what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then another thing, it would be benches. Benches were big whenever I was, hunting with Dad in Pennsylvania. You'll get these, in logging country or timber country, you'll have these old logging roads that are cut on the side of a mountain, and it just makes a flat spot. You'll have your hill coming up, and then it'll be flat for a little bit, then it'll be hill again. And they like to travel on those. It's a little more comfortable. They can bet on those oftentimes, and so they can catch thermals in the morning. They can catch cool thermals coming down in the evening. Benches are really cool. Whenever it comes to more of like the topography in the Midwest, one of the features I'm looking for, and it's not really a elevation or terrain change as much as like an interior cove or an area that's a little bit open but still brushy before it gets to bigger ag, so that deer can get up, stretch, get comfortable with being in the open a little bit before he ventures back out. And so I'm looking for those types of little things, more in the Midwest, as opposed to like, there's not many benches here in Southern Iowa.
Sure.
So
yeah,
occasionally you'll find some, but
right.
Can you touch on, and I might be jumping the gun on this, but a little bit selfishly, we have on our property that we hunt in Pennsylvania, in our farm, we have a big bunch of fingers, like at the end of a draw, at the top of a draw, coming out of a field. And it's been a place where we might be looking at it the right way. We might not be. We know the deer bed in there, but I'm curious to know, or Kira asked you of your opinion on how the deer use fingers like that. What a finger is, first of all, describe what a finger is. And then how do the deer use fingers?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've got a great location on the farm that I'm managing. I actually call it 9 fingers. And that's a little bit of an homage to my 9-fingered friend, Dan Johnson. It literally is it's a big crop field that comes out south to north, and then there's these fingers, these draws, these timbered draws or mini draws that lead up into the main field. And so what you're going to find when you have a lot of draws like that, it's going to take a little while for me to figure out how to hunt 9 fingers, because there's literally, there's 5 here and there's 4 here. And it's like, which one do you choose to hone in on? Well, if you have a couple fingers, and like, let's say you've got like, okay, so what a finger is, first of all, is timber. It's not farmed, right? So you may have this perfect block that could be farmed, right? Or you could have a couple low spots where the farmer just he'll go around it, just kind of like he's mowing grass. He's going to plant where he can get the planter and his equipment, but these other places just over time have grown up, and now they're timber. At one time they were probably just grass and brush, or they were farmed, and through erosion he just quit farming there, and so it creates this finger. So you'll see a lot of fingers in farm country, and where that finger comes out, where it juts out into the field, you're going to find movement around that finger, but you're also going to find movement from that finger or that finger to the next one. So anytime you can, like, what you want to do is find the closest cover. So if you got these 2 fingers that are this far away, and then you got these 2 that are this close, the movement back and forth here is going to be the most significant out of the whole area. I almost guarantee it. And it's just time after time I've watched deer. I've been, I've observed, deer go from use that least bit of field that they have to be open in, or that
Yep.
lowest spot, which a lot of times where you find two fingers come across, there's a little bit of a low spot there.
Yep.
I mean, time after time, whenever I'm selling these farms here as well, you know, listing farms, I'll be talking with the seller and they'll say, man, that part of the field right there was always where the most deer movement was. And the consistent thing is that they're staying in the cover as far as they can up that finger. They're
Yep.
going to move over to the closest other piece of cover. And that's how you're really going to look at fingers, is perpendicular movement and then around.
Yeah, that makes
Yep.
sense.
That makes
Yep.
sense.
Especially for a trail camera too, guys. I mean, I would be putting trail cameras on the end of those fingers because they're just going to naturally hug
Yep.
that line, you know, that curve.
That makes
we've
sense.
definitely seen that. There's no doubt. I mean, we've had cameras out in the end of those, and that's exactly what you're saying has happened.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like too at the kind of the head of a draw, at least the one that's on our farm, it's usually pretty wet. So it's pretty thick in there. It's pretty nasty. And obviously when you have that, you know, type of habitat, deer are gonna use that all day long to bed. And then obviously during the rut, you know, bucks are going to be looking in there for does. So we've definitely seen that. We don't have a ton of that. We do have one main one, and there's been a ton of activity in there all the time. So we just, you know, we typically try to just let it go for the most part, kind of hunt the edges if we can. But yeah, that's kind of what we have, at least on our place.
There's a lot of those. They just feel so safe in those little zipper draws. They're brushy, they're thick, they're out of sight. There's wind swirling in there, so they're always catching sense of what's around. I mean, it's really hard to toughen those. Really tough to hunt in those things. But if you can anticipate them coming out of it, you leave that as a bedding area, anticipate them coming out of it. Or if there's a very specific place where you can intercept them on a crossing or whatever, I mean, that can be a really deadly spot. But
makes sense.
Yeah, they like them. They like the ditches. So.
Yeah,
it's awesome learning a property, you know, and I'm sure you've gotten to do that a lot, right? Like just from your experience and stuff, but like just learning a new property and every little thing you learn every year, you know, like last year where we found, you know, these 2 points where we know there's buck beds there. And then we realized that we're accessing an area where a buck potentially could see you when you're accessing it. So you're thinking about all the wind, you're thinking about all these things, and then boom, this light bulb goes off and you're standing in this buck's bed in the wintertime and you're looking out and you're going, man, we accessed the stand like, you know, 60 yards away. And he could have been there the whole time and he sees it, you're done. But just learning those different little things to get a little bit of an edge, and then being able to now understand maps. I just feel like every year we get, you know, you just get closer to understanding it.
Yeah.
They can, you know, those deer really can, we give them a heck of a lot of credit. Sometimes it can be, we make it too complicated on ourselves, you know, but on the other hand, you got to think about those small details. And even like you said, one of them is just from an access perspective, you know, like I just let a farm go because it was night. There's big deer in that area, but there's a number of reasons why I let it go. But one of the major ones is I can only access from the north, and that timber, they could all bed on the hillside that faced that whole road and field. So they could see me coming all the time, especially for any sort of evening hunt, you know? So it was just, I couldn't get access from any other way. And it really handcuffed me. But
well, you bring up a good point though, because I think, and then you hear that a lot more now. I think as guys are learning more technologies, better maps, or better things like that, is there is actually areas where you just can't hunt a deer, like said, like there's spots where you just have to go. There's not even a chance that I'm getting in there to kill that deer. So, and understanding that is important
for sure. So I'm just going through my list here. I wrote down a bunch of different things here. So saddle, obviously we covered. Spur, draw, ridge, hill. Can you just, you know, I know that's not a huge one, but just talk about what is a hill?
Yeah. So a hill is really just any high spot, you know, and higher than its surrounding area. And especially in Southern Iowa, we can see some beautiful hillsides hills are really important because they, depending on which way they face, they'll have certain types of vegetation. In timber country, and I don't know big timber, I don't know my timber species as well for like out east where where you guys are for what species growing north facing versus what species growing south facing, but I do know that there is a difference. And so when you get sun exposure on different sides of the hill, you're going to have different vegetation. And when you have a difference in vegetation, you have change. And that's where we got to pay attention to that, not overlook that part of a hill where when it's oriented one way and depending on how much sunlight it gets, deer are going to prefer to be there certain times of the day and not. So I'm looking at hill and the habitat of a hill based on which way the sun's facing. And just from an approach standpoint, those deer really, they bet up on that hill. They just feel so safe because they can see what's coming below them. It's really tough to be able to hunt like the top of a lone round top unless you have different access points and, you get creative when you hunt, but hill country can be a challenge, but it can be rewarding as well.
Yeah. Another one would be, and maybe we touched on it, but you'll hear a lot is a point. So where would what is a point? How does that fit into the kind of the puzzle of the terrain?
Yeah. So the point is really the end of the ridge, where that ridge starts to peter off. Yep. Like this would be, I think in the Army handbook, they call this the cliff, where it's just a straight drop off. But even if you're looking at your spurs, these would be your points where it really starts to drop down, kind of where the end of the ridge or the end of the spur is the point. And the point can be great for movement, kind of like a finger where, those deer will work around it, whether they're right on the point or they're 30 yards below or 50 yards below or whatever the case may be. There's probably going to be a trail around that point. Occasionally you'll find deer come right down, up and down, but it's really going to depend on where that, if there's some sort of vegetation change at the end of that point. That's really where I would start to micro tune where that stand site should be. But one of the most productive stands on my dad's property back home is on a nice big oak flat point. So
makes sense. Makes sense. So I know another big one we haven't really touched on yet, but valleys, and then to go along with valleys, typically when you have a valley, there could be a water source down there like a creek, so creek crossings too. So maybe touch on just valleys. And a lot of people say valleys are pretty tough to hunt because the wind is not consistent. So maybe just touch on valleys, kind of what creates a valley, and then obviously if there's a water source, a creek crossing, and how you can use that and how the deer use that.
Yeah, so your valley is going to be the lowest spot in that area, and that's probably, like you said, where you're going to find water the most. So depending on how wide that valley is, and sometimes valleys can be, miles wide, a main river valley, right? But when we're talking about the valley of a farm or the valley of a property, if it's tighter, you're going to have a lot of deer movement down there. You're going to see a ton of sign. It's just going to be a challenge to hunt from a wind perspective if your prevailing winds or the winds that you think you can hunt on are perpendicular to that valley. If they're perpendicular and you have, okay, so I'm visualizing the valley here, but if you've got the wind coming this way, you're going to have a lot of swirling in there. It's going to depend on the wind direction, but it's also going to depend on the wind speed. And so the faster wind a lot of times will, carry your scent out. But the slower wind is really where it can start to churn in there. So you got to be thinking about your wind direction. If the wind is running with the valley, you can get some really good consistent. It can be good, and you can work with that. It's just the question is, how are they using that valley? How are they, are there any defined places there that they're preferring to go from one to the next? And where you can find that is at a creek, like what you were alluding to.
Yep.
You can scout your creek for crossings. You can look at the map and see, anytime it makes a more of a curve or like an S curve or whatnot, that's where you'll have your most erosion, where you have all, the most erosion is going to be where your largest walls are. So the
Yep.
deer aren't necessarily just going to come right down off of there. They'll go in between where those S's are, which is what would be the most gradual spot. So that's an old school tactic that Winky pointed out to me, you know, in one of his old books or whatnot that I read, or an article I read, you know, a long time ago, but it makes sense. And every time that stream curves, you're going to have more erosion. And so they're going to want to move in between those. So creek crossings, and then just being able to identify those trails that are leading towards food sources, whether you're heading to some oaks, or you're heading to some soybeans, or you're heading to a hay field, or whatever the case may be, using that to your advantage in the valley. But man, a lot of times it's easier to take a map and cross off where I can't go, where I don't want to hunt. And valleys are normally one of them, just because I can't get a good wind in there.
Yeah,
you know,
that makes sense. Makes sense. I don't think I have any others on my list here. But you know, I know it's tough, you know, on just audio, but can you just kind of touch on briefly, like reading a topographic map and how you do that, and how you can identify like some of these main things looking at a map like that? Because a lot of times people look at it and they'll just see a bunch of lines. I know, like, I can identify some of these main ones, but I a lot of times just see a bunch of lines, and I don't really know what I'm looking for. I don't know how to identify some of these things, and I don't really know what I'm trying to pick out to then go in and actually, you know, get boots on the ground and look at it. So like I said, I know it's probably a little difficult just talking about it, but you know, whatever advice you can give on that would be helpful.
Yeah. So what I would tell somebody if I had to explain the topo map to an alien and say, listen, this is a topo map, Mr. Alien, it would be, basically these lines are drawn around the same elevation point. And if you go 5 feet below, or 10 feet down, or 10 feet up, and you're going to have another consistent elevation point. And so that's what those lines represent as a measurement, whether it's 760 feet above sea level, or 20 feet above sea level, or 14,000 feet above sea level. You're going to have these lines that are represent an elevation. Well, if you would take a mountain, okay, if you would take a mountain and you would cross section it off, right? You would, if we took this mountain and we cut it right across and we drew a line around that, that would be at the top of our hill. And then we went a little bit lower and we cut that across, we'd have a little bit of a wider ring, right? But if that was steeper, if the mountain got steeper like this, and we cut these cross sections, those lines would be tighter together. And so on a topo map, when you see lines come closer together, that means that elevation change occurs quicker. Not quicker. It occurs in a shorter distance. And when elevation change happens in a shorter distance, that just means more drastic change in terrain. When those lines are farther apart, it's more flat. So a drastic example would be in the swamps of, let's say the swamps of Minnesota, right? Or Wisconsin, or Michigan, where these big swamps that are super flat. And then you have these little hills or these little bumps. You'll see on our maps, you'll see just this little orange, and our topo lines are orange, is what we do. And you'll see these little orange ovals. Maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3. And that just signifies, like, out of all this flat earth, there's a little bump and a little change in elevation. And that's going to be dry ground out of that swamp. The bucks are going to be bedded on those little bumps. So topo lines, topo maps originally started just as the lines. You couldn't see any terrain underneath. You couldn't see any aerial imagery. And it was like, whoa, like, what does all this mean? You could stare at this and get sick and not want to look at topo maps anymore. Or you could your brain could start to put the pieces together, like, okay, there's I can tell that's a ravine, or, oh, that's a ridge line. But we make it easier with HUNTERRA. We put it all together, and those topo lines on top of the Terra image, which is already a 3D image, it makes, I mean, anybody can immediately see the change in topography. It's really defined and detailed. So the topo lines are going to be able to tell you what those different features are. A draw is going to look more like a beak, like a bird's beak. It's going to come up to a point. A ridge line is going to have parallel lines running with it, and that's just signifying that this ground is running a certain way, and on each side it's dropping off.
Yep.
When you see a saddle, you can see that pretty easily because it looks like an hourglass. The hilltop may be here, and it might be a circle, and then the hilltop might be here, and it's a circle, and then in between you see these lines that kind of do a like an hourglass shape, and where that pinch is the saddle. So there's no easy way to really like force feed that onto somebody. You just kind of have to look at it and walk some ground and start to understand. Your brain will eventually become like kind of keen on being able to read these terrain features.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think Corey, you can jump in. One of the best ways that I've found is just looking at your guys' map, because it kind of already has that 3D overlay, and then you see the topo lines on top of that, and then it just kind of makes sense in your head, because you see what the line's doing, but then you actually see like the 3D image behind it, what it's actually doing. It's a really easy way to like learn quickly. Like, if the line does this, here's what the ground looks like. I found that that's helped me a ton personally.
Great. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the goal. Anytime you can make it easier and make it almost something where it's like, oh, I'm not trying to figure this map out. Like, you're just looking and you're figuring out your ground, just looking at the map. Then we've accomplished our mission.
Right.
So I have it's not like really a random question, and it might be a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, and I'm going somewhere with this, so I'm going to ask the question. Is there ever a time where you aren't able to actually make a map of a certain property itself? Or is it unlimited? Like, you can get a map made for anywhere?
Anywhere in the lower 48 is where we really focus on. And where we do have challenges is whenever somebody wants a map of, a map too large for that area. So if we take, somebody's got a 10-acre property or a 10-acre little homestead, and they want that on like our largest 40 by 60 map, that's where we have to push back and say, listen, we don't want to give you a map that has bad resolution just because we're blowing it way up. So that's where, I'm not here to just take people's money. I'm here to get them the best. HUNTERRA exists for people to get the best map for them, and biggest doesn't always mean the best.
Sure.
So but there's really not been a property that we couldn't have mapped. I mean, occasionally we'll find imagery where you got some sort of cloud coverage or whatnot, but that's very few and far between. So it's been, so far we're pretty much undefeated in that regard.
That's good. Yeah, I have not that, I mean, it would be a huge help to probably have a HUNTERRA map, but Texas is obviously just different terrain. Like, there's not a lot of edge at all, so it's a little bit tougher. It's just different. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so it's learning a new area and stuff. And I got really lucky to draw a whitetail hunt in November this year, and it's on a national wildlife refuge, and there's literally 3 draws a year. So it's 3 management units. The total acreage is like 11,000 acres. So it's a big property. So, I just started scouting it, and I was actually out there this weekend. They do 3 weekends, first, second, and third weekend in November, and they draw. So there might be 70 other hunters. It's all archery, and it's 70 hunters each weekend, and it's 11,000 acres. So it's a cool property, but it's so tough, like, learning it. And obviously, you get on Google, like, you can see some things, but it's not. So like, I was out there this weekend, I'm like, man, I should have a HUNTERRA map. So I'm just curious if, like, when it comes to like federal land and stuff like that, like, does it matter, or you can make it anywhere?
Actually, we did have a guy reach out to us and ask if we could make a map. So he drew a tag for an ammunition plant, and there are these ammunition plants around the United States that they're just they're big properties, they're big chunks of ground, and with all of that land, occasionally they'll let some people bow hunt it. And so he drew that. He wanted us to make a map of that ammunition plant, and so I actually contacted, I think it was like the engineer there or whatnot, just to make sure it was okay, because I didn't want them the hunter showing up and saying, "Hey, check out this awesome map we made." Even though it's I could zoom right in on it with Google Earth or our imagery or whatnot. It was I asked him, and and so that was one that I didn't get permission to map, and to this day I was like, I don't really know if I needed to ask permission, but I didn't want to get in hot water either. I know how that is in the world of national security. So it would be so what's that property in Texas? What does that habitat look like? Is it hill country or is it like crazy, brush?
Man. It's actually right on Lake Texoma, which is one of the biggest lakes in the world. But so it borders the lake. It's a mix, man. It's some grassland. So there is quite a bit of edge. I shouldn't say quite a bit, but there is edge. So there is some fields that are basically grassland. They're not crop fields or anything. It's a national refuge, so it's protected for most of the year. They do a waterfowl draw hunt there. It's a crazy waterfowl hunt. Apparently, there's the whitetail hunt, and then they do a hog draw hunt every single year. They do turkey too, so there's some turkey there. But it's for the most part, and I did find there's ponds. You know what I mean? So there's ponds kind of spread out on the property. It's a lot of wetlands, so there is definitely some wetlands there because the lake's right there. So if it, it can flood too. It can basically cut off access points and stuff like that. It's not, there's not a lot of elevation at all. I mean, there's little bumps and ridges and things like that, but you could, they might be 10 feet high, and that's the ridge, so there's not a lot of that. There is some draws and things like that there. It seems like, just looking from Google too, and being there is quite a bit of, I guess, it wouldn't be fingers, there would be draws that kind of go towards the lake, off of these little hilltops and stuff. So it's interesting. It's interesting to walk around a property like that. And, I'm going to spend a lot of time there. You can scout it. It's a really regulated hunt. So you can scout it as much as you want up until the actual hunt. You can't hang trail cameras, which actually, honestly,
that's kind of nice.
Yeah. I actually think that's a cool way to hunt it. But they've shot huge deer out of this. It's one of those places that nobody really ever talks about. And when you think of Texas, you think of South Texas, huge deer, that's where the big deer are. But in reality, I think the top, 6 of the top scoring whitetails in Texas were shot literally out of this place called the Hagerman.
Dang.
They shot a 9-year-old, 215-inch deer 3 years ago out of there.
Dang.
Huge deer in there. But again, it's this place that it wasn't on their the Texas draw hunt. It's an online, for all of the draws, it's an online. For this place, it hasn't been online. So literally, if you don't know about it, you literally, I wrote down on an index card my name and sent that in to this to their visitor center basically, and then that's how they draw. They draw on index cards that people send in. Next year, it's going on the online service. So there's going to be 10,000 people that apply for that hunt. But up until this year, there was, they'd get 1,200 people that apply or something like that. So
she had decent odds.
Yeah. So
that's cool. You drew.
Yeah, it'll be cool. It's different. I mean, again, it's you grow up hunting mostly public land in Pennsylvania, and then you come out here and everything is lease, some public land, but everything's lease. And then you have these draw hunts all over the state, and they're just really regulated, but it'll be cool. I'm excited.
Awesome. Some of the biggest deer that I have known being killed here, at least in Iowa, have been around those wetlands. Just something about wet, swampy, grassy habitat just creates these mega monsters.
I know.
And so that's really cool. I hope you kill a big one out of there.
Yeah, appreciate that. Me too, man. Me too. I know we kind of got way off track.
Yeah, no,
that's all good.
Yeah. So we've touched on a lot on terrain and maps. I want to switch gears in a second, but is there anything else that you think we kind of missed, or anything else that you think, someone should be aware of as they're starting to kind of look at maps, look at terrain, how they can use it? Or do you think we kind of covered most of it at this point?
We covered I think we covered a lot of terrain features, and we can kind of go that. I think it's really good to talk about the different features and how to hunt them. But the biggest takeaway, the biggest advice I would give somebody that's trying to learn more about these features or just trying to become a better hunter is like, just go for it. Like, we give these deer so much credit of like walking on eggshells when we step in, like, oh my gosh, like this is my only access point, or I just bounced them and I'm never going to see them again or whatnot. It's like, err on the side of being aggressive. And I think that you'll have a more fruitful hunting career. And I think that you'll learn more quicker. And in turn, you'll just have more success if you just get on the offensive a little bit more. Don't be scared as much about affecting them. Like, learn, get out there, check these different features out, hunt them different ways than other people talk about it. There obviously are some fundamentals that all of successful hunters, follow. But I know people that are like hyper conservative, big managed farms, like, oh, John Madden could cook up the game plan on how to kill this whitetail, right? Or and they don't do as good as the guys that are like running and gunning and always changing it up and just getting on the offensive to kill an animal. And that's my biggest advice. Like, we talk about these terrain features and everything, but get after them. That's probably my biggest takeaway. And really going back, looking for that change, looking for that edge, observe on the map, observe on the ground, and find those subtle areas of change, and I think you'll find what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, just with anything in life, we learn the most from our failures. And if you're not in it and you're not failing at all with hunting or with whatever, you're not going to learn. If you're just sitting on the sidelines and you're hunting super conservative, you're not going to really fail, but you're not going to learn anything either. For Corey and I last year, I think we were really aggressive the year before. And then last year we were like hyper conservative, and we had an okay season, but I was talking to him after the season. I was like, man, I just feel like we weren't aggressive enough. Like, we weren't in there. And like you said, these deer, and especially if you're chasing mature deer, they're smart. They don't let you make too many mistakes. But at the end of the day, they're still animals, right? And and you got to be in there getting after them if you want to kill them. And so I think that exactly what you're saying. I mean, that was pretty much us last year, and we've already talked about, like, we got to be in it this year. We got to be in it if it doesn't work out.
If you bump a bedded buck, he, like, mission accomplished him bedding there.
Yeah.
Why would he say, oh, that was a failure?
Right.
Of bedding in that area? When you bump a deer, that's like mega value.
Yep.
You know what I mean? When you bump a big deer. So I think that's like a good example of not being scared to get a little bit deeper or look around what that next corner is. I when I first moved here, the very first whitetail that I encountered was a beautiful buck. He was pushing 170, clean 10, super heavy body, just a tank, probably minimum 5, might have been 6 years old then, whatever. He was fully mature then. And so I chased him all season. I grunted him over that one day. It was the closest I got. I drew on him, and he needed like maybe 3 more steps, and he knew something was weird. And that was the closest I got to him. And I saw him 6 times that season. And I never was able to even feel like I was like, all right, like today I could have a chance at killing him. It was always like he was further ahead. And Dad and I were shed hunting that winter, and Actually, no, we weren't shed hunting. It would have been, we saw him shed hunting. He was still carrying his rack, but then it was been about a month before that. I think I was pulling cameras or something, get him off of there for, postseason. And I bumped him. And he ran into this little patch, about 12, 13, 14 acres. He ran into this patch of brush, and there's a creek bottom there. And then it's just all multiflora rose. It's all big rose bushes. Like, if Satan could design a thicket, it would look like this. Very, like, just a nasty, thorny piece of the farm that I'd never hunted. Well, I didn't hunt that year before. And so I said, well, man, I better check that out. He ran right down into there, and I saw him. He stopped, and I could see he just started walking, and he was fine. It was like, okay, well, he feels safe there. So I remembered that. And so I came back shed season. I hung 2 stands, and I said, I'm not coming back in here until November. And I'm if he's around, I'm going in there, and hopefully, and sure enough, I mean, my first hunt in that thicket, within 3 hours, I ran into him. And then I encountered him the 2 next times that I hunted. That third time I put an arrow in him, and I never did get him, but I never did recover him. I hit him back and a little bit high. And he really shook me up, and so what a great learning lesson that was, though, that, like, you look at it on the map, like, there's only one way in on this place, only one way out. I went in there like basically 3 out of 5 days and encountered them through those 3 times,
Wow.
So
it's crazy.
You got to get after them.
Yeah, you do. No, that's really good.
It's a good lesson, man.
Well, let's shift gears. We've talked a lot about the terrain and all of that. And obviously it's something that we love talking about, love deer hunting. But, we'll kind of wrap up our talk here tonight and just talk about the importance of family. That's something we talk about a lot, and introducing the youth to the outdoors. That's something we're really passionate about. I know you have a young son. So just talk about kind of what that looks like for you, what it means to you to kind of introduce him to this, and why you feel that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of my most powerful memories of life came from being in the woods with my dad. I mean, and I'm not afraid to say this. There would be times, whether I was in high school or college, after a weekend hunting with dad, I would, like, literally, maybe I'm driving back to college, and I'd, like, literally get choked up just thinking about, like not just thinking about any one thing, like how lucky I am or how blessed I am, or just like that feeling of your dad taking you out in the woods, and whether we get a deer or not, it's just an indescribable bond that can be created there. And so I'm very fortunate that my dad spent a ton of time with me in the outdoors and introduced me, kept pushing me, from turkey hunting with a 20 gauge to turkey hunting with a, moving up to a 12 gauge, and from using, I think, my first rifle was probably like a 220, 222 or something that had, like, no kick. And then I jumped up to a 30-30. Then he pushed me to a 0.6. And then next thing you know, he's like, you're going to try it. Like, let's try bow hunting, and I sent an arrow at this one deer and I didn't get him. It was like the biggest rush in my life. And it's like, my dad introduced me to all of that. And so moving out here to Iowa was definitely bittersweet in that we don't get to hunt as much together, but when we do get to hunt, we cherish those times. We we try to go to either Kansas every year, Illinois, and then luckily he's gonna draw this year here in Iowa. So we're gonna have basically 2 full months to bow hunt together. And now that I'm a father, I got a 3.5-year-old boy, and he's like, he's very advanced for his age already. It's kind of scary, but he's just constantly wanting to just do the things I want to do or hang out with me. And just because of my passions, I've got, a couple different farms I manage and hunt on, and he's coming right along as much as he can, and 2 years ago, I shot my best buck ever. He recovered it that night with me. My mom came, like, my mom was watching Jack when I was hunting. Unfortunately, my wife wasn't with me. She was on a trip, but just having him there, and like, he didn't know what the heck was going on. He was 2 years old, but he did know something was going on. And it's like, man, I want to just keep going as far as he wants to go. So that's really important to me. Creating this bond that my dad gave, my dad and I built together. I want to try to reciprocate that with my son and pay it forward. And just like where I'm at, people probably think, oh, well, guy owns HUNTERRA Maps and works for Whitetail Properties, and he probably gets to hunt all the time. And it's just not the case at all. My priorities are shifting, where I want to spend more time with my son, really. I mean, I just didn't hunt as much as I did last year, because I want to be home as much as I can and see him, and for those different milestones that he's making every day, So more hunting will come in time, probably as he gets older, and we'll get back out but it's definitely a priority change, and it just has happened naturally. It's not like, oh, this is what I'm responsible for doing now. And I think that's hopefully foreshadowing good things ahead, for times for us in the field.
Man, it's special, man. I'm excited for you to see him grow up. And I told you before, I have a 5-year-old little girl, and man, one of the coolest things is when they start asking you questions that are like so innocent. I was this past Saturday morning, I was having my coffee, and my daughter and I were sitting down there. She's having her breakfast, and she said to me, just out of nowhere, right? She said, "Daddy, so when you shoot a deer in Pennsylvania, how do you get it here?" Like, just these innocent things, And I kind of was talking through that a little bit with her. And she said, "Now, so are we going to eat the ears?" And I said, "No, we don't eat the ears." She said, "Are we going to eat the nose?" And I said, "We're not going to eat the nose." Then she goes, "Okay, how about the tongue?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I've never personally had the tongue. Some people can eat the tongue, but dude, you get into these conversations, man. I'm so excited for you to like get to that point too, because it's like you're educating them, and they're so innocent, but it's like this fresh palate where you can teach them the right way to think about the animal, respect it and honor it and things like that. Man, it's really cool, man. I appreciate you sharing that. It's really,
it's awesome.
All of us, the three of us,
Heck yeah. Sure. Yeah. These kids, they're so unjaded and so innocent. It's like, sometimes like that's a really logical question, buddy.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
and so it's good to hear that, and they keep us on our toes for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, I've had a blast talking about all of this stuff. I've learned a ton, and we appreciate you coming on here. I know you're a super busy guy, especially with a young son now. Super busy with that, but we appreciate you taking some time here tonight and chatting with us.
For sure.
I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's been a blast. You guys are very, very good at what you do here, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit and having a conversation.
Yeah, man. Sure. We'll have to continue building the relationship. And man, how do folks get in touch with you? We'll put all of your information stuff in the podcast description, everything. But if anybody wants to reach out to you, how do they get a map? That kind of thing. Like, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, HUNTERRA.com is our website. We've got some pretty exciting new things coming down the pike here. Hopefully by the end of August, we're going to be launching some new things with HUNTERRA. So you can check that out. I work for Whitetail Properties Real Estate. I'm an eastern southeast Iowa land specialist here. So you'll find some content on Whitetail Properties, my listings, and that side of that other business that I have. There's some YouTube videos that I've been making for Whitetail Properties as well. If you're fascinated more about like what I'm up to, I've been contributing to our new our new YouTube series called Land Beat. And so Land Beat is where a number of us are bringing different making these just short videos on what is CRP, or understanding what the USDA Service Center offers you in your county, or reading maps and reading terrain and planting apple trees. Like, that kind of stuff is that's valuable to a landowner, we're doing on Landbeat. And so you can find some of my content there. I'm on the different social media channels. So there's a number of different ways you search for me. You can get a hold of me, and try to be as accessible to anybody that wants to, talk about land, talk about maps, or just introduce themselves. I try to be available for as many, for everybody, so hit me up.
It's great, man.
Awesome. Dave, any last words?
Nope. That's all I got. I got a lot of terrain things floating around in my head right now.
Like
I gotta go look. I gotta go break out my HUNTERRA map now.
I know. We're gonna have to do a Zoom session on the map itself, like in a couple.
I know.
I can't.
That'd be awesome. We should do it.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to break it down maybe at some point. It'll be good. Really cool. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate, again, Ben, I appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. And for everybody out there, so go to our YouTube page and subscribe there for all the new podcasts that are coming up. We've got a pretty good lineup coming up over the next couple of weeks. We got some guys coming on, and we're excited to continue to put content out and educate you guys, and then also just share and start to build this rooted community that we're building, where we're supporting each other as hunters and outdoorsmen, and a place where guys aren't afraid to talk about some of the things that are going through their head and things they might be struggling with, and all the family balance we're talking about and things like that. So go there, Facebook page or Instagram, and that's all I got.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
See ya.
Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. Colossians 2:6 and 7.